Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corin. So I'd like to ask one more prompt about stimulated from my home server construction marathon tonight. I mentioned that I first built a computer 20 years ago, and a lot of time elapsed between then and now, but the commonality is that I've been really interested in tech and dabbling in it and sometimes working in it, and I guess it's part of my life really. One thing that's changed as I've gotten older, I wouldn't say that I have more disposable income, although comparing to when I was a college student, probably do. But it's that I've less patience and time for bad quality gear. And I find that I'm in opposition to the impression one might get from this podcast. I actually buy much more selectively and carefully. And something I really love about AI is it's a fantastic partner when I'm trying to research something. Like, for example, building this home server. I was able to say exactly what I need, exactly what I want to do. It actually saved me a lot of money because I was able to reuse existing components, which is pretty cool. And that's more sustainable. So total win. So my purchasing habits, I'd say, have changed from being, I think, when you're learning about tech and exploring it, you kind of want to go for lower quality gear maybe, or cheaper, more affordable products, just a way to learn the ropes when you don't have a huge budget or a big budget. And over time, when you kind of start to know what you're doing, and time becomes a valuable commodity, you start looking for quality. And that's kind of where I am now. I'm very proud to say that I own a UniFi access point, which for those who aren't into their Wi-Fi is the step up from TP-Link. It's a really great Wi-Fi. And what I'd like to do with this home server, that is kind of I'd say a probably stopgap build, but I might swap out some components. I'm very attracted to the idea of buy it for life, as I've mentioned before. There's a subreddit, for those who haven't heard of it, called Buy It For Life, and it's inspired a movement called BIFL for people who, as the name suggests, are looking for products that are very durable. And I'm a huge fan of, in general, stuff that is industrial, ruggedized, tough, whether we're talking about redback boots, which are fantastic footwear for half the year. I have those on my feet, through to anything that can really stand up to a beating is, for me, that trumps the best features every day of the week. So I'm asking this prompt in the specific context of computer parts because I've just finished building the server. And there's a bit of a dichotomy here, or a problem, in that the idea of buy it for life with something like computer components is inherently problematic because of how quickly technology and hardware evolves. So it's, by the time even 4 years down the line, if you're looking at the motherboard as the central component currently of a computer, who knows if it will even be that way in a few years. Even a 2-year-old motherboard is going to have different connections than you have nowadays. So the pace of deprecation and semi-deprecation is very quick. Nevertheless, if I were buying this home server that I just put in new components for, and I were buying it in a bit more of a deliberate process, and not because it broke, and therefore I was kind of approaching it more like a ideal build, my starting point probably would have been, what's the most durable component? And I probably would have used that lens to pick out every component in the server, from the PSU through to the motherboard, through to the RAM, through to etc. So I would have looked for which, within each bracket, I would have firstly decided what I need. Is an i5 good enough? Is an i7 good enough? But it's a home server that's running Home Assistant and a few containers in Docker. So nothing extraordinary and required in terms of processing. So my filter criterion would have been, within each component, what has the best, which manufacturer has the best reputation for quality and durability. What's going to minimize my chances that this is going to break at any point between now and when I next upgrade the machine. I mentioned I had a motherboard failure recently, and I think that's probably pretty hard to avoid at 10 years, but that's the kind of thing that would make me think, well, what's a rock solid motherboard that's going to have a low rate of failure, good quality manufacturing? And that's where I would have invested my money, as opposed to what's the latest and greatest. I would have optimized for build quality and durability. So Herman and Corn, I don't think this is a topic that gets covered all that frequently, actually, because there is some interest in stuff like ruggedized laptops for folks who are in the military, working in, my wife's an architect, as I keep mentioning. So I know for contractors, it's quite popular to have these incredible, they're very expensive, very, very expensive, beefy laptops that you can kind of drop off a building and they'll probably survive. But within the context of desktop components and server components, I'd love to know your thoughts on what manufacturers, what products one would be kind of leaning towards if that were the focus of a build. Herman and Corn, let's talk about durability and maybe even ruggedization in desktop and server components. Over to you two.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn, and I'm sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother and resident technical encyclopedia,
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. It is a beautiful day here, but honestly, I would rather be inside talking shop.
Well, you are in luck, because our housemate Daniel sent us a prompt that is right up your alley. He has been on a bit of a home server construction marathon lately. He was telling me that since he started building personal computers 20 years ago, his priorities have shifted. He has less patience for hardware that fails or feels cheap. He is looking for that buy-it-for-life philosophy, but applied to the world of desktop and server components.
That is such a fascinating contradiction to unpack. The buy-it-for-life movement, or BIFL as the internet calls it, is usually about things like cast-iron skillets, leather boots, or high-end hand tools, things that can literally last 50 years. But in the tech world, 5 years is an eternity, and 10 years is ancient history.
I know, right? So the question is, how do you maximize durability and build quality while acknowledging that the technology itself might become obsolete? Daniel wants to know which manufacturers or specific product lines we should lean toward if we want to minimize the chance of failure and maximize that feeling of industrial ruggedization.
I love this because it forces us to look past the flashy RGB lights and the marketing hype about frame rates. We are looking at the literal bones of the machine. If you want a computer that feels like a piece of industrial equipment rather than a disposable consumer toy, you have to change your entire sourcing strategy.
Let us start with the foundation. If Daniel is building a server or a high-end desktop, the motherboard is the most likely point of failure over a 10-year span, right? It has the most complex circuitry and the most components that can degrade.
You have hit the nail on the head. Motherboards are notorious because they are essentially a city of tiny components. If one capacitor blows or one trace corrodes, the whole system is toast. If you want buy-it-for-life quality in a motherboard, you generally have to step away from the gaming brands and look at the workstation or server-grade manufacturers.
Like who? Are we talking about the stuff that goes into massive data centers?
That is the idea. Brands like Supermicro or AS Rockrack. These companies build boards designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for a decade. They do not care about fancy heat sinks with dragon logos. They care about component spacing for airflow, high-quality power delivery, and thicker printed circuit boards. A standard consumer board might have 4 to 6 layers, but a high-end server board often has 8 to 12 layers of copper and fiberglass, which prevents the board from warping under heat over time.
But could a regular person just buy a Supermicro board and put it in a normal case?
Usually, yes. They have standard ATX and micro, ATX form factors. The thing you notice immediately with these boards is the lack of fluff. You will see green or blue printed circuit boards, which looks old school, but the actual components, the chokes, the capacitors, and the voltage regulator modules, are often rated for much higher temperatures than consumer boards.
What about the consumer brands that claim to be rugged? I am thinking of the ASUS-TUF series or their ProArt line. Do those actually offer better durability? Or is it just a marketing aesthetic?
It is a bit of both. The ASUS-TUF line actually started as a very serious attempt at ruggedization. Back in the day, they had the saber-tooth boards that came with a 5-year warranty, which was unheard of. Today, the TUF line is a bit more mainstream, but it still tends to use military-grade certified components. However, if you want the real deal, the ProArt series or the ProWS Workstation series is actually closer to what Daniel is looking for. It is aimed at creators and engineers who cannot afford downtime. They use higher quality networking chips and more robust power phases.
I remember Daniel mentioning he has a Ubiquiti Unify access point now, and he feels like it is a massive step up from his old TP-Link gear. It feels more professional. Does that same logic apply to power supplies? Because that seems like the most dangerous component to go cheap on.
The power supply is the heart of the system. If it dies, it can take everything else with it. If you want to buy it for life power supply, there is really one name that stands above the rest, and that is Seasonic.
I knew you were going to say Seasonic. You have been a fanboy for years.
For good reason. Seasonic is an original equipment manufacturer. Most other brands just put their sticker on a unit made by someone else. When you buy a high-end Seasonic, like their Prime series, you are getting a 12-year warranty. Think about that. They are betting that their product will still be working perfectly in the year 2038.
12 years is incredible for electronics. What are they doing differently inside the box?
It comes down to the capacitors. Cheap power supplies use Chinese electrolytic capacitors that dry out over time, especially under heat. High-end units use 100% Japanese capacitors rated for 105 degrees Celsius. They also use fluid dynamic bearing fans which are much quieter and last significantly longer than cheap sleeve bearing fans. Plus, with the new ATX 3.1 standards, these units are built to handle massive power spikes without tripping.
Is there any benefit to going with a fanless power supply if you want durability? No moving parts sounds like it fits the buy it for life theme.
It does, but it is a double-edged sword. Passive cooling means the components run hotter, and heat is the enemy of longevity. A high-quality fan that only spins up when necessary is usually a better bet for long-term stability.
Let us talk about storage. Daniel is building a home server, so data integrity is huge. We have moved past the era of clicking hard drives, but solid-state drives have their own lifespan issues with write endurance.
This is where the distinction between consumer and enterprise gear gets really sharp. If you buy a standard Samsung Evo drive, it is great for a laptop. But if you are running a server with constant logging and database writes, you want enterprise-grade flash.
You are talking about those drives with the crazy high endurance ratings, right?
That is the key thing. Look for drives with high drive writes per day ratings. Companies like Micron or Western Digital Gold or the Seagate Exos line. These drives often use something called over-provisioning. They might actually have 500 gigabytes of flash memory inside, but they only tell the computer there is 400 gigabytes. The extra space is used to replace worn-out cells. It is like having a spare tire that automatically swaps itself in when the main one gets thin. Also, look for power loss protection, or PLP. It uses tiny capacitors to ensure the drive finishes writing data even if the power gets cut.
That is a great analogy. What about the physical build of the case? Daniel mentioned those Red Wing boots he wears. They are heavy, they are overbuilt, and they can be resoled. Is there a computer case equivalent to a pair of Heritage boots?
I think the equivalent would be something like a Fractal Design or a high-end Lian Li, but specifically their professional lines. You want thick steel or aluminum. Thin, cheap cases vibrate, and vibration is bad for mechanical parts and can even loosen connections over time. But if you want the ultimate in ruggedization, you look at industrial rack mount chassis from companies like Chenbro or Silverstone. They are built like tanks. No tempered glass, no plastic clips, just metal and screws.
It sounds like the buy it for life philosophy in tech is less about the product lasting forever and more about the product being serviceable and reliable during its useful life.
That is right. You cannot stop a central processing unit from becoming slow compared to new chips, but you can stop it from crashing. Speaking of which, we have to talk about error correction code memory.
This is one of those things that usually stays in the server world, but you think it is worth it for a high-end desktop too?
If you care about durability in the sense of data durability, then yes. Standard random access memory can have tiny bit flips caused by cosmic rays or heat. Most of the time, it just causes a minor glitch or a blue screen. But sometimes, it can corrupt a file you are saving. Error correction. Code random access memory detects and fixes those errors on the fly. For a buy-it-for-life build, you want that peace of mind.
Does it require a specific motherboard and central processing unit?
It does. This is why the choice of platform is so important. Advanced Micro Devices has traditionally been better about supporting error correction code on their consumer Ryzen chips. On the Intel side, they used to lock it behind Xeon chips, but now you can get error correction code support on many consumer Core i5, i7, and i9 processors if you pair them with a W-series workstation motherboard. If Daniel wants a truly rugged system, he should verify that his entire chain supports error correction code.
I want to go back to something Daniel said in his prompt. He mentioned he has less patience for bad quality gear as he gets older. I think we all feel that. When you are 20, you do not mind troubleshooting a weird driver issue at 2 in the morning. When you are 40, you just want the machine to work so you can do your job or enjoy your hobby.
That is the hidden cost of cheap hardware. It is not just the replacement cost, it is the time cost. If a $50 motherboard fails, it takes you 5 hours to tear down the system, get a replacement, and rebuild it. What is 5 hours of your life worth? Probably more than the $50 you saved.
So, if we were to give Daniel a shopping list for a buy-it-for-life style server build right now, what are the brand names that represent that peak of reliability?
For the motherboard, I would look at the ASRock Rack series, specifically their Deep Micro ATX boards if you want something compact. They are brilliant pieces of engineering. For the power supply, a Seasonic Prime Titanium. It is the gold standard, or I guess the titanium standard. For cooling, we have not mentioned them yet, but Noctua is the only answer.
Oh, definitely. Those beige and brown fans are the definition of buy-it-for-life.
They really are. They use high-quality bearings. They come with every mounting bracket you could ever need, and if a new central processing unit socket comes out in 5 years, Noctua will often send you the new mounting hardware for free. That is a company that understands the long-term relationship with a customer.
I love that. It is so rare in the tech industry to see a company support a product for a decade. Most companies want you to throw the whole thing away and buy the new version.
And for the central processing unit cooler itself, I would tell Daniel to stick with a big air cooler like the Noctua NHD15G2 rather than an all-in-one liquid cooler.
Why is that? I thought liquid cooling was the high-end choice.
It is the high-performance choice, but not the high-durability choice. A liquid cooler has a pump, and pumps eventually fail. They also have the tiny risk of leaking. An air cooler is just a big block of metal. The only thing that can fail is the fan, which you can swap out in 30 seconds. A big metal heatsink will literally last forever. You could find a heatsink from 20 years ago in a scrapyard, wash it, and it would work perfectly today. That is, buy it for life.
That is a great point. Simplicity is a form of ruggedization. The fewer moving parts, the fewer points of failure.
It is. It is the same reason why industrial machines use physical buttons instead of touchscreens. Touchscreens are fancy, but physical switches are robust.
What about the networking side of things? Daniel mentioned his Unify gear. Is that actually better built, or is it just the software that is better?
The hardware is definitely a step up. If you take apart a consumer router, it is often a single board with everything integrated and very little heat management. Enterprise or prosumer gear like Ubiquiti or MikroTik uses dedicated chips for different functions and usually has much better thermal design. Heat is the #1 killer of networking gear because it is usually tucked away in a closet with no airflow.
So, if Daniel is looking at his home server, he should probably think about the environment it is in too. Ruggedization is not just about the parts, it is about how you treat them.
Absolutely. If you want your gear to last, you need a dust management strategy. High-quality cases have removable filters. Use them. And you need a clean power source. A buy-it-for-life build is incomplete without a good, uninterruptible power supply, or UPS.
Right, because Jerusalem power can be a little flickery sometimes, especially during the winter storms.
That is right. An uninterruptible power supply from a company like APC or CyberPower protects the sensitive electronics from voltage spikes and brownouts. You want one that provides a pure sine wave output, which is much easier on high-end power supplies. A single power surge can bypass even the best Seasonic power supply and fry your motherboard. If you are investing in high-end components, you have to protect that investment.
I think there is also a psychological element to this. When you buy something that you know is high quality, you tend to take better care of it. You clean the filters more often. You cable manage it better. It becomes a pride of ownership thing.
Like Daniel and his Red Wing boots. He probably oils the leather and keeps them clean. He treats them like a tool, not a disposable item. We should treat our computers the same way.
It is interesting to think about how this applies to the fast pace of technological depreciation that Daniel mentioned. Even if the hardware is still physically perfect in 10 years, it might be too slow to run the software of the future. How do you reconcile that?
You look for versatility. This is why I love the home server context. A 10-year-old central processing unit might be too slow for modern video editing or gaming, but it is still incredibly powerful for a file server, a home automation hub, or a private cloud. If you buy high-quality components now, you are ensuring that the hardware survives long enough to be repurposed for its second or third life.
That is the real sustainability angle. The most eco-friendly computer is the one you do not have to replace every 3 years.
That is it. We talk a lot about recycling, but reuse is much better, and you can only reuse gear that was built to last in the first place.
I am curious about the manufacturers themselves. Are there any brands you used to trust that you think have gone downhill in terms of build quality?
That is a tough one. I think a lot of the big names have struggled with consistency as they have scaled up. Some of the major motherboard manufacturers have had issues with BIOS stability or component choices in their mid-range boards. That is why I tend to stick to the dedicated workstation lines. When a company targets professionals, they know that a single failure can ruin a reputation. Gamers are often more forgiving as long as the performance is high. Professionals are not.
It is about the incentives. If your customer is a data center buying 10,000 motherboards, you cannot afford a 2% failure rate. That would be a catastrophe. If your customer is a teenager buying one board, a 2% failure rate is just a few annoyed support tickets.
You have it. Follow the enterprise money. If you want to know what is truly durable, look at what the people who lose money when things break are buying.
This has been really enlightening, Herman. I think Daniel has a lot to work with here. It is about shifting the focus from speed to stability, and from flash to features that actually matter, like Japanese capacitors, error correction code support, and overbuilt heatsinks.
And do not forget the brown fans.
Never forget the brown fans. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone that if you are enjoying these deep dives, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And if you have your own weird prompts or questions about tech, life, or anything in between, you can find us at myweirdprompts.com. There is a contact form there, and we love hearing from you.
We really do. Thanks again to Daniel for this prompt. It was fun to nerd out on the literal nuts and bolts of computing.
My pleasure. This has been My Weird Prompts.
We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.